evening. I just want to make sure you're at the Social Justice 216 Social Justice Annual Lecture. Welcome. I'd like to begin by inviting May Sam to come up and welcome us.
I'd like to welcome each and every one for this evening, and I really thank you for coming to be here to be with our special guest and to welcome her here. It's an honor to have you here with us. So I'm going to say the prayer in Ho'ominum. It's my first language. I never spoke English. I didn't know there was another word, another language until I went to school when I was about 6 years old. And learned how to learn English, and it was so hard and so tough. But my prayer, I truly believe in it, is stronger in my language. And then I try to remember everything that I said in my prayer for a blessing for each and every one of you. And the song also is to help you to cope with everyday life and to be happy in your heart, to be strong and happy in your heart. And with the family, as you go home to be with your family, a blessing for each and every one in your home, to take care of them through prayer. Even if it's far, far away, that blessing will reach your loved one. Those of you that are from far away from home at the moment, but I really thank you for coming here this evening. So I'm going to do the blessing to give you strength and faith and for every day of your life and every evening. So much now, and say, come on up, stay, yourself, praise, Lord, on stay. Nasi, Haich, Patito, Siam, and I snake. Zichumi, Nawasi, Lao, Mokni, Kato, Naman, Nasnake, Nasi, Haich. Zichumi, Nawasi, Lao, Mados, the taste of all the Scholars, Gone post of the Scholars, who east of all the Scholars, Mox Quail, Nasi, Haich, Patito, Siam, Nasi. Eat the Mokni, Kato, Naman, Zichumi, Nawasi, Lao, they do it all, Nasi, enough, because he's school cost of Lowman, the Slickest. These eyes for school cost of 8 enough, University of Victoria. The Chach and Tamach Nasi, the Bonin Song Haste Tamach, Slach and Stock with the Chach and Tamach Nasi Haichka. The dots of Mains Nasi, Zichumi Lowman Tamach, I used to leave the Overfleet Macro. I praise and I ask the Creator for a beautiful blessing for each and every one here with us this evening, that you're truly going to give them a helping hand in their daily work as they travel here into the university, and especially when they travel back home. Take care of each and every one of our loved ones here. Watch over them. Give them all the blessings in the world. Also for a blessing for the land that we walk on here, Squimalt, Songhees, Saanich territory. I praise and I ask you, dear Heavenly Father, to watch over each and every one that are here with us this evening. and also for our ancestors here before us, that they're truly going to take care of each and every one, and no harm to come to anyone as they travel here into the University of Victoria. And a blessing for our dear guest. Take care of her and watch over her. Give her the strength that she needs to carry on. And also for each and every one, the ones that prepared this evening, the hard work to have all this come together. Bless them in each and every way in their daily work. I praise and I thank the Creator for wonderful evening, for a blessing for each and every one. Care of each and every one. Merci,
Maybe I'll try speaking without the mic, since I've got that loud teacher's voice. I'm Margo Matwichuk, Director of Social Justice Studies at UVic. I'll begin by acknowledging that I'm a visitor on this territory, having arrived on these beautiful lands 25 years ago. I was born and raised as a settler for another part of my life in Treaty and 1 and 2 territories in the Interlake region of Manitoba. That's sort of the place I still consider home, although again recognizing it was somebody else's home. I'm honored to introduce you this evening to Dr. Dian Million. Dr. Million is Tanaka Athabaskan, Tanana Athabaskan, the original inhabitants of the Tanana River drainage basin in the east central Alaska interior in the United States and parts of the Yukon, Canada. She has spent much of her life living on and across the border between Canada and the United States in the north-northwest and the south-northwest. She is currently an Associate Professor of American Indian Studies and affiliated faculty in Canadian Studies, the Comparative History of Ideas program, and the English department at the University of Washington, Seattle. Dr. Million received her MA in Ethnic Studies in 1998 and her PhD from the University of California at Berkeley in 2004. She received the Charles Eastman Predoctoral Fellowship at Dartmouth College for her dissertation entitled Telling Secrets, Politics, Gender, and Race in the Production of Aboriginal Sovereignty. Her work focuses on American and Canadian Native peoples with an emphasis on gender, health, indigeneity, and race and ethnicity. She teaches courses on Indigenous politics, literature, feminisms, and social issues. Prior to this academic journey, Dian, I switched to Dian now, had and continues to have a significant impact as an Indigenous feminist activist, having come of age and in conversation and solidarity with iconic Indigenous feminists, including Lee Miracle, Marie Campbell, Jeanette Armstrong, and Ruby Slipperjack. She was an early member of WARN, Women of All Red Nation, which was founded in 1974 to champion the health, rights, and responsibilities of Native American women and communities. Dian is also a writer and a poet and a co-founder of the Northwest Native American Writers. As an active writer and poet, she strives to bring experiential and felt thought to the classroom, to her research, and to her activism. In her article, There's a River in Me, Theory from Life, she writes that narratives, stories, can be practical, strategic, and restorative. In an online entry I found, Dian wrote, "I was removed from my home when I was 12 because we were having a particularly hard time. I spent my young womanhood in foster homes, one in Washington, D.C., and in Hillcrest Schools for Girls in Salem, Oregon. I started writing stories to remember my folks and what we were feeling. I want to reflect on some of the confusion I experienced as a Native woman looking for reasons in history and in human nature for a myriad of experiences. I cared deeply about the forces that moved within, about the losses we endured and learned from. One was loss of children, because I was first concerned about how many Native children were removed from Alaska in the 1950s. I faced learning a whole history of the attempt to destroy our families." End of quote. Her current book, Therapeutic Nations, Healing in an Age of Indigenous Human Rights, continues this learning process. In her own words, Therapeutic Nations follows traces of colonial gender and sexual violence into our present strategic emergence of Indigenous voice, movement, resistance, and resurgence. This is the subject of her talk this evening. It is part, I think, of her larger commitment to what she calls the power of intense dreaming, or, quote, the felt intensification where boundaries shift and other views become available to us. Welcome, Dr. Million. Welcome, Dian. Thank you.
I'm going to turn my phone on. Scared to death it'll go off if I can find my phone. Okay, if it goes off, I'll be able to find it then. Usually I just use my voice. I'm kind of loud. Well, it's trying to tell me to quiet down. So I'll turn this on over here. Okay, is that? Are you picking me up? Can you hear me? Yeah. In the back room. Dunita. My name is Dian Million. I'm part of the Wood River Band, Tanana Athabascan. I'm a daughter of the Ace, the Albert, Charlie, and Evan families from Nenana, Alaska. I am a mom, a grandma, a great-grandma, and one part of a 30-year partnership with a brave woman. I want to thank all of you and know that I come into these territories with a good heart. I want to thank May. I want to thank all of the people that have welcomed me here, all of you. So, Haishka to our Wet'suwet'en hosts, the Songhees and Eskimo in their unceded territories. Otsiam to their extended relations as the Kakochin, the Sekum, Sartlet, Shinu, Suk, and Malka. I apologize for my very bad pronunciations. I thank the Coast Salish, who have been family to me as I resided away from home over these many years in Tlimi, Nooksack, and Swinomish territories. My hands go up to your generosity and kindness. I would like to sincerely thank Margot Matichuk, the Director of Social Justice Studies and the Chair of the Academic Women's Caucus, Jin Sun Yoon for this invitation, for their ardent work in organizing this event, and for their careful consideration of my health and comfort. Thank you to the sponsors for the donations that made this conversation possible. I thank all of you for being present here to explore our relations, our possibility of relations, and the tension and joy and sometimes heartache of our efforts. I invoke Niquinik today for mutual listening, to listen effectively, to think relationally, and to foreground our relations and make them anew. So, what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to read some part of this because it's later in the evening, and at this point in time, I forget more than I ever knew. So I'm going to work very closely with these notes, so I'll be walking back and forth, giving you maybe a little bit of visuals, taking some of my words on. I'm going to actually read you a couple of poems before I begin to talk about this book. I'd like to tell you a little bit about why I wrote it, and also where I feel like that this has brought me. It's brought me on a very long journey. It's brought me here to talk to you, obviously. And so, what are the roots of this subject? They go back very deeply in my life, as you heard Margot say. And so I'm going to attempt to tie this together a little bit. So I'll start with a couple poems. That's how I make my voice calm down. Currency. Watching our blood, its journey into plasma bags, laying still on tables, hearing the coughs and restless movements of people bleeding for the $7 which sends us out again, able to face looking for something, this deep red fluid that propels our hearts. War is money, the blood spilled to the earth, blood appearing suddenly with no warning from wounds that we inflict on one another. The blood is the currency by which we trade our destinies, propel some to be takers on this world where racial memories are named for the taker. Sand Creek, Box Redondo, Auschwitz, Cape Town, the lives we remember individually from the wars fought for money to run strip mining, take land, erase entire peoples, no one left untouched. Yet some remain silent, not told, that our blood is currency, that for $7 or for 7 billion, it will never buy one thing back. Invocation. Old ones say only the earth endures. In the beginning, before the beginning, we became, perhaps from the stone or sky, what is not known. We all uttered a word for human, a soft word unfolding from the palate in earth's great mouth. Centuries of emerging, learning what is human, Dini. The old people hear it in the wind at night. The land still older tells them, do not leave. We have known you well. Your shapes and shades mingled all the long night of year. So on these four corners we know the earth beats. Humans walk toward the fifth world. Do not fear. Pray to be guided well. Do not speak harshly. We know it is not that the earth is raped. It is unthinkable. The human beings that are gathering here. What we think, we create. Our thoughts we must know. Earth enduring, life enduring, east enduring, west enduring, north enduring, south enduring. Grandmother, we invoke. So basically, I brought my family with me. See how good this works. That's me and my, generation that's current with me. That's part of our generations that, are going to take us on. We're a miracle family. Because we are still a family. And that's why I brought them here, because I want them to also witness what I say tonight. Because this, for me, is not just a talk. It's not just a book talk. It's how is it that we find our lives? How do we find reasons to live in the midst of a concerted effort to erase everything that we are? So I have positive things to say about the efforts that are made. So anyway, again, Duita, thanks for putting up for it with me. Okay, so this is the organizing principle of what I'm going to say tonight, okay? Basically, I'm going to talk a little bit about human rights and something we call its technologies in its projects, okay? And I'll get a little more into that. This is just, trying to let you know ahead of time kind of where I'm going, okay? I want to address in particular not just human rights, but Indigenous human rights, what is the specificity of that? And then I want to talk about what, the kind of accomplishment it is after 30 years of working towards a Declaration of Human Rights. What actually has it given, or what does it give? And then secondly, I really want to go into the whole idea of healing in our times. Because I think that we bandy the word around a lot. We say we're going to heal somebody or something, but we don't even know what it is that they're ill of, or that they're ill. So I actually took apart the concept of trauma and traced it through human rights language. And that's not to deny the kind of real pain that some people have endured or as part of them. It's just to say again, it's a concept, and it's a developed concept. I'm going to discuss how that is. I've said sometimes that this is like being bandaged by your assailant as he continues to ransack your home. This is a Russell Tribunal. Because like 1970s. And it's the first time that you begin to see all of these people, they're meeting overseas in Geneva and places like that in the names of Indigenous human rights. And why are we there? Basically, in our times, we couldn't get the states of Canada and the United States to hear us at all. At the same time, we were under attack by a lot of state forces down in, the Puget Sound area, all the Swinomish and all those folks that I live among now. They were on the rivers fishing and struggling for what they felt were not just their fishing rights, but their lives. It's so easy for us to slip into rights language at this point, about what it meant to them. It meant their literal lives. All over the place, those long ways of living that we had, that our ancestors that gave them sustenance, that gave them food and ways of life, they were under attack. And so some of the very first people began to go overseas because they felt like that they could maybe get outside of their own state into what I would call an extra-legal situation that had some kind of impact on how states treated them. They were looking for justice. They were hearing that human rights was the place to go. So there's this extra state, this appeal to some legal body outside the state. And I'm not going to talk to you about bearing witness as a Native woman in those times in a minute, but I just wanted to show you something. I'm going to close this one down for a second just to show you something I think might feel even more, familiar to you. This is the newspaper that came out in 1981. It says in its corner here, "Nationhood, we always had it." And one of the things that is, in this generation at least, there has been a considerable amount of critique of our Native nationalisms in those times. We were Native nationalists. We meant for it to be that way because we had always been nations. We hadn't been nation states, is what we hadn't been. We had been nations with languages and lands that we loved. We had ways of life. We had ways of knowing that endured to this very day. But we did feel like we were in a battle. And this is a paper about that movement at that time. And it's see what it says. See if you remember any of this. Indian World is the official voice of the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs. It is dedicated to building a strong foundation for the Indian government by providing an awareness of the political and social issues affecting the Indians of British Columbia. Written contributions by Chief Archie Patrick, John Elliott, Marilyn Napoleon, Lynn Jorgensen, Angel Adolf, the Brats, Wilford Peltier, Ernie Benedict, etc. Sharon Ben's on there. And I myself came across sometimes to visit Ethel Pearson and her husband Greg. So that's kind of what that looked like. And even in this paper here, you can see it was like Indian nations seek world support. Okay, that's why we went there. And we are a sovereign people. We have international rights under international law to determine our destination as sovereign people. This is the message which our delegation of people from British Columbia took to the United Nations in New York at the beginning of December 1980. It was a really exciting time to live through. The reason I'm sharing this with you tonight is because we're now at the other end of a kind of an era in which we trusted the United Nations to give us justice. And how is this related, to the reconciliation that is happening here in Canada at this point? Well, it's very closely related. Because if we didn't have this ethos, this place we moved into looking for justice, we wouldn't have had the instrument of a United Nations technology here in Canada right now, attempting to give justice for I don't think there's a strong enough word to what happened to Native children in these residential schools. I just don't. I used to call it the litany of horror, Some peoples, of course, had a better situation there, but there were enough people, okay, that Canada felt like it owed them some kind of answer to, that this was a case that was taken to a United Nations technology. Even if it's even if we, can look back and see, how we got from there to here now, and why this may not be an arena where we got justice, either then or even now, okay, is part of what I'm here to talk about tonight. So what I want to talk to you about a little bit more is like the bearing witness, and I wish I'll go back to the other one, so get out of memory lane here. Who is this figure? This is an Indigenous woman from Guatemala. And at that time, of course, as they had gone to the United Nations, they covered their faces. They covered their faces because they were liable to get murdered for going there and asking for help. So that's, a lot of people don't know that's where that kind of, you begin to see that, you see that more often through the 1990s, in the Warrior Society, people began to cover their faces, and everybody was saying, well, why are they doing that? Why are they trying to hide their faces? They're doing it in honor of these peoples that once had to hide their faces because they'd literally be murdered if they were identified in this media. So this was actually the first time we actually had met other people from other Indigenous places talking about our own, okay, the loss of children, et cetera, et cetera. And that leads me to the whole idea of bearing witness and the voices of women that were involved in this movement that I'm kind of trying to picture for you a little. There was enormous amount of Native women, an enormous amount of Indigenous women. And we found out there that we were actually had a lot in common. Because what colonization or colonialism had meant in our actual lives had been this huge, and I call it an evisceration, which means the gut. Evisceration of our families. And so as women, because we were really close to, you know what I'm saying, what this was as at that point as a young girl, and being lost to a social welfare system prior to the Indian Child Welfare Act. Okay, many of us, it was a long trip home. But even then, some of us felt extremely displaced by what had happened, and so we came together in cities to organize. And so there was quite a few women's groups in those days. Women of Red Nations, of course, is the one that gets cited a lot, but we were part of United Indian Women, and that United Indian Women gathered lots of women from the Northwest. And I had sisterhood with a lot of people at this time. One of them, of course, is Jeanette Armstrong here, but also Lee Miracle. But Jeanette Armstrong went home and actually, beyond running around doing poetry with the rest of us, she went home and did some incredible programs. So we were teaching each other. We were teaching each other how to write, but what we were really doing is we were teaching each other how to use our voices. And to this day, I know you think I'm probably just an extrovert. This is just so easy for me. It's not. I had to learn to use my voice. I want to say to all of you young women out there in particular that you grow into your voice. It's okay if you don't just have it. It takes a long time. Where I'm from, they don't even actually let you talk until you're 40. So anyway, I was in the presence of some very, very strong women in which we actually learned to say what our lives were. And at that same time, of course, this was the beginning of this human rights era or whatever. Bearing witness also meant witnessing injustice, of course, okay? Or, witnessing to the world what, for justice, rather. And so we collectively did bring a lot of what is now known, okay, about women's history in that time. It's in our poetry. It's in our, in Canada up here, it's in several novels. It's in, it's in the work of many peoples. And I don't really want anyone to forget that work. I don't really want people to forget these names. I'm going to go backwards a little bit and recover some of them. Certainly there was Lee Miracle that gave us, probably one of the very first accounts of Indigenous feminism that we have, although she wouldn't have called it that. There was Christos, there was Jeanette Armstrong, there was Gloria Bird, there was a Portland-based Warren group. Many of us, whose names are out there more. There was the women that worked for the Leonard Peltier Defense Committee, and I put the poster of Leonard Peltier up because he's still in prison. He's 40 years later. But what we were actually witnessing to was it might have been our pain, but it was also our desire to live. It was the actual intensity of our life force that we had to try to put into words. We had to honor our moms, our grandmothers. We had to honor the earth as a mother, as a generative force in the world. So it wasn't just about death and destruction. It was about how it is do you live through death and destruction. That's where we were coming from. And people sometimes forget that part, you know. Today, there's many grounded women activists coming up and activist scholars coming up in this generation that I'm just going to give really a nod to, that I want you to know. I'm going to speak a little bit tomorrow about Leanne Simpson, who's Anishinaabe. There's Eva Tuck, there's Audra Simpson. Besides Leanne Simpson, Audra Simpson, they always like laugh. They say, no relation. They have relations, it's not sisterhood. Well, different kind of sisterhood. Sarah Hunt, all the women identified peoples of the Native Youth Sexual Health Network, all of those are this generation's voices that are witnessing something. So I would just say that. We had our children with us. We had our children with us because we had this was and I said that to some of the people when I was just kind of walking around the room trying to get ready to do this. I said, well, we went from, community to community to talk about how to support the communities the best that we know how. We would somehow raise money for all the legal battles that we had to undertake to get this justice that was supposed to be ours. That as people organized and up and down the coast around the rights to their land, to the rights, women were involved, and we took our children everywhere because we wanted them to witness this fight for life. And we told them that this was, our responsibility. It was our responsibility, and that we would teach them to carry it on, so that we would never go backwards. But I think the expectations were, that's the difficult part. I'm not going to go on and on about this, but I think that the expectations were very high in the beginning. That was going to, that we had created a place that we could take our very local concerns about our lands, about our lives, about our families, about the violence of the state, okay, both against our families as they tried to make a living on the rivers, or they tried to make a living on the lands, and that we would, that we would do this, be able to do this, and that people would hear us. And that's where the witnessing part really comes in. Why would we be witnesses if no one was listening? Why would we witness these things? Just to ourselves? Yes, we could do that. But I have to admit that I think that we were listening, we were witnessing because we thought people were listening. And that's what happened is that as I got older, I saw as usual, a huge forgetting happen. A huge forgetting. That as I went into school, when I went back to school, or as I began to teach classes, school, as I went on with my work, I found that the generations would come again and again with the same questions. What do you guys want? What are you about? And so I said, well, this book actually is about that ability for the state and the state's citizens to forget so easily. And so we never can move forward because we'll always stand in front and tell you and you that this damage has been done. And how is it that we will heal? And what in the heck is healing in the face of this enormous forgetting? What is it? Okay, turn the page. I have my computer set on so it goes to sleep too easy, right? It's forgetting. So this part here is more difficult to say, I can speak so much of this just from the heart. But this is the part where I got really kind of academic about the whole thing. Well, one of the things that happens, of course, is that the discourse that was in place, the conversation, that's what discourse is, it's a conversation. The conversation in place when I was really young was about justice. I just told you that. It was about international, legally based, some kind of justice, okay, in which lands would be restored, okay, in which political rights were actually given, that people in local communities would be empowered to teach their own children, to manage their own resources, to do all these things that people should be able to do, to manage their own lives as they see fit, in the language they see fit to have it in, to teach their children in their own language. We could go on and on. That's what we imagined. But those were actually, conceived of and thought of and fought for because it was thought to be political. Somewhere around the early 1980s, all that language went away. All that language went away. You could still hear it. I mean, it was always, the treaty rights, especially here in BC because of the unceded lands, because of the lack of, the arrogance and thinking they could actually just take it without making any kind of agreement. So you still hear a lot about treaty rights, or you would hear about treaty rights, but that language about that was always really kept separate from this other language that began to more or less medicalize all these things that we women had once thought were exceedingly important political points. What women felt, okay, what women thought were actually foundations for healthy nations, for healthy nationhoods, totally segregated from these political rights, or the political things. As Glenn Coulthard says in Redskins, White Masks, he said, "We can ask for recognition all we want, but we can't change the power relations that way, because the inequality, the inequity remains." So you can negotiate for rights all you want. Those rights, the rights ones that we thought were going to be our goal. Put them in settler language now. But no, that's not what happened. What happened was, basically, this is how I always thought, there's an assailant still beating you up, and he's like asking if he can bandage you. The real inequities, the real damages done to Indigenous peoples, to Native peoples, and I'm trying to keep it close to home and not like get all, were done by the actual political means of extracting everything that gives people a way to live. This was still going on. The extraction, the extraction of any kind of means of living in the communities continue to impoverish the communities. The loss of children, the enormous inequity in how many people, Native peoples, are criminalized and go to jail, or remain their whole lives in jail. The poisoning of waters, the poisoning of lands, Okay, I could just go on and on and on. All of that causes people not to be well. But we never used to call that an illness. We called it what we knew it was. It was a political and racial genocide. And so at that point, they segregated the women's concerns, which it was the women that was witnessing, to the down home, the places in which children were lost, or in which death and suicides, etc., were, again, I called it an evisceration on purpose because it just serves it gives you a real felt imagination for what it means to have a family gutted. And so those are actually acts of the state. They don't just happen. Those are acts in the name of the citizens of the state. These are not just political actions by your government. They're done in your name. They're done in Canada's name. They're done on behalf of the citizens who are the natural human rights subjects of these nation states. Everyone else is, and that's why I thought it was ironic that in 2007 they would give us human rights. The 2007 Declaration of Human Rights for Indigenous Peoples is passed in 2007, so that we now have the rights, the same rights as the rightless. We have the same human rights as everyone else on earth who is not a citizen, who is, stateless and homeless, because that's what human rights is for. That's the subject of human rights. So I don't think that human rights is a place where we got justice. What happened again is they segregated the politics of what states actually do in our communities. They segregated that part of it over to a certain conversation at the same time that the damage is read as trauma and medicalized. Those things cannot be separate. And what's interesting to me is, what I did is in the book, and it's a lot more complex than this, I traced this. I traced it, this change in language from us being political subjects to being victims, basically. or medicalized victims, okay? And so, we're going to heal from the trauma, but what is the trauma? The trauma is colonization. Well, even that's too vague. We're traumatized because we're having our lives extracted by the need for capitalism to extract these places, to extract the resource and life out of these places. And these are the places that we have long relations. Remember, we're about life. Put my hands up to our elder. She told you, we're about life. We're not about death. And so I traced this concept as far as I could. And one of the things, and I'm just going to read this part to you because it's easier for me, because I get off on a tangent. It's okay. The embedding of a concept and logic of trauma in the efforts to reconcile the victims of colonial violence with the state as a perpetrator. The victim's witness to the assault so that reparation, healing can be made as to normalize relations. In this case, money, adaptive history, again, more witnessing, being heard, memorials. I contrast this known human rights technology with any particular state's full-scale retreat from, well, in the United States and Canada, full-scale retreat from any reviews of oil, gas exploration, reviews or including rights of refusal by the Native Nations, and still undetermined self-determination, and instead of self-determination, of self-management within this medicalized working capitalism. Marginality writ large in the Arctic as defense, exploration, and increased, this is what happened in my country, as defense, exploration, and increased activity for oil. Melts our land, melts our country. Native displacement, continued degradation of native life and lifeways, with an emphasis on increased violence against women that occurs in this degradation of lifeways. So that's what I do. I pull it back in and say that as Native women, we actually stand for something that is for life, and that I do not think that the murder and missing, so-called missingness of Native women is an accident. It's a byproduct of this continuing disregard for all of our lives. Oh, wake up. Jeez. The thing that's really been surprising to me about this analysis that I made is that a lot of people in other movements have understood this medicalization of what was social justice, were areas that we once spoke of actual justice, fight and struggle for social justice in. And so I understand that, and we all understand at this point that
we're all speaking a different language. I like these folks a lot. I like them because they have put some of the, what I would call the deepest fault lines that, you know, nation states create in their own gendered, racialized, gendered creation of their power relations. What they've done is, as these young youth, is to go back and reclaim them for life, for their communities. So what am I talking about here is that rather than reading people as deviant or as deviants, what they do is they say, these are our families. These are our mothers, these are our children. They may be trans, they may be sex workers, or they just may be mothers. It doesn't matter. They're human beings. These are like we used to say, these are the people. We love them. We love these people. They are our lives. So, what we are about at this point is not to reduce ourselves to subjects of this damage, not to reduce ourselves to being this victim, okay, which is the subject of this new medicalized discourse. So where does that put me in terms of the reconciliation? How can we reconcile? I can't say that we can reconcile because there was no whole in the beginning to reconcile. The instrument, in this case, was an instrument that was put into place to reconcile political violence. In the case of peoples that were already a state, they were the citizens of states that had political violence, like Guatemala and other places. Well, I wouldn't say that because that's the indigenous population, but I would say, let's see, South Africa. I don't know. Everywhere I look now, I have to rethink that one, okay? I don't know any place where there was probably a hole, but this is definitely the technology, okay, that has been brought in to try to reconcile people with the state, okay? And I thought that it was just really interesting that they would, you know, use it here. And particularly in the face of the fact that what we really need here is clearly, to me, is to go back and say, we're going to face up to the fact that these peoples have been here for thousands and thousands of years. These peoples live here. These peoples, they're marginalized in our name. The kinds of resources that they don't have are basically benefit someone. Do they benefit you? Believe me, my life has been really different since I started working for the corporate university. I'm not afraid to tell you. But the state rewards what looks most like it. So if you have one of these, you know, lives, okay, that benefits, what you have to say is, who doesn't benefit? And go back to speaking a political language rather than medicalized language. That would be the first thing I would have to say about it. And we actually ask for real social justice again. And I'm old. Well, I'm older. Okay. I'm older, and I don't pretend that I have answers that I think this generation could help us. But we live in circles where we think that our elders inform us. And so we don't look at this like, you know, the young are going to solve all our problems. That was kind of unthinkable to us. We have to look to our ancestors, we look to our families and our extended, you know, relations for answers, just as well as we know that the youth themselves carry seeds for life in them, that they're going to carry things out differently than us. So for all of you who are young, I would ask that you think really carefully about what it is you want to give your life up to, okay? And that it's very real that at this point in time, I will just say out loud, I do not believe that capitalism is a sustainable way of life for any of us. And that we have to, even in the face of massive contradictions, okay? In massive contradictions, I definitely own a car, and a big one too. I do. But I didn't drive for 40 years either. No, that doesn't excuse me. What I'm saying, in the face of massive contradictions, you have to come forward and at least fess up. What do you give and what do you take? But it's not about us as individuals, and that's the other thing too. It's not about us, oh, because as an individual you're just going to be overwhelmed. We didn't even understand anything about, we work together, we always work together to make life. And so it's a trick. It's really a trick that you are an individual consumer, and that it will make you have a better life. It can make you have a better life, but it will most certainly make other people not have any life at all. So I speak strong about this because I know that, you know, we're not alone in knowing that what it means to be the brunt of someone taking our lives. On the other hand, I don't demonize all people, because everyone has the capacity in them to stand up and make something different. I told a class last night, it's unfortunate, but revolution does not happen the way we used to think it did. We used to think that we could just change things and then it would be nirvana. No, every generation fights its struggles and we all change things, but we have no complete control over the outcome of the changes that we demand and ask for. That's why I can stand and see what we asked for in the 1980s was not what we thought it was. And that's just the reality, is it? And so I'm going to tell you that all of us are involved in this, and all of us have answers, and we don't do this alone, and we never do this alone. Where am I in time?
Quarter after 8.
About quarter after 8? Okay. I'm going to keep going for just a little bit here. Okay. I want to talk a little bit, I think, before I end this, about the way I see some people coming forward right now. And I had one right there. I had Billy Ray Belcourt. Does anybody know who Billy Ray Belcourt is? You don't know? You do. Yay. All right. Somebody else knows? What do you think? The reason that I've got Billy Ray Belcourt in this, because I really like something that he said. Well, he's a member of the Therapeutic Nation, and he was just picked to have a Rhodes Scholarship. Yeah, he did. And
the reason that I kind of like have been kind of following what he's been saying is not only is because he's thinking out loud, and I want to hear, you know, what people have to say that are going to take, you know, some responsibility. This young First Nations person that's, you know, won this kind of prestigious academic honor. But, you know, I felt like it's also that there's some wisdom in the way that, you know, he actually accepted this honor. And I say that because it was interesting to hear about his experience. And his experience accepting this honor was that all of a sudden people had him pegged because they couldn't read a positive Native. They couldn't read a Native person as having had a positive experience. Because our lives get reduced often to the litany of violence against us. And so what he said was, in settler states like Canada, ones that repeatedly try to destroy those that point out their barely extant and unlawful forms of sovereignty, Indigenous people live in the specter of violence. But things get misinterpreted. Indigenous peoples are quickly collapsed into violence. And if that's all we were, as if indigeneity were its own kind of death sentence. We know, however, that the state is the perpetrator, that colonialism is the perpetrator, and that Indigenous peoples are resisting and world building as we speak. In fact, some of us are already on our way to the future. We're conjuring an ethic needed to create a time space in which violence against Indigenous peoples isn't a survival tactic. I did not succeed in spite of my Indigenousness. I succeeded because of my Indigenousness, which is where I really wanted to go. Because it's easy to paint the litany of violence. That's the easy part. The part that we don't have yet is this incredible amount of energy put into world building at this point. I spent a little over an hour at iGov, the program, Indigenous governance program here, and the people in iGov are engaged in world building. They're not engaged in reducing themselves to, you know, to the sum of the violence that's been perpetrated against them. What they are doing is they know that our peoples, no matter how much under siege they have been, have left us considerable gifts to take on, to go forward with. And they are still fighting. I have absolutely no right whatsoever to tell anyone that this cannot be done. I don't care what our experiences were, you know, or what we changed or thought we changed that did not work out. Because we are still here. Because we still do have people who speak languages. We have enormous amount of energy among our peoples, in our places, that restore poison streams, that take care of land that's been stripped, that build solar panels, okay, in the face of uranium drilling next to them. How can anyone refuse to help such an effort? How can anyone refuse, in the face of that kind of bravery, not to stand up for it? And often I do know that I speak to an audience that doesn't need to be convinced of these things. But nevertheless, for me to put, like we say, to put our voices up into the universe is to cause something to happen. That's why we're so careful of our speaking. That's why old people used to tell us, what you say can happen. So do not put death into the air, put life out there. But I have to tell you about these things. I have to tell you about, our experience. That was my lot in life, Alania. I first did it in poetry, and now I'm doing it in another language, basically, academic language. But it is to give, I wouldn't walk away from here and say that this young man or any young person or any of us that still stand up and attempt to do something, no matter how, no matter how that might go, that it's worthless. It's not. We used to believe that a person wasn't just born a human. You had to be taught. You had to be brought in through ceremony, and you had to learn how to act towards your relations. You had to learn your manners. That's what made you human. So what I challenge you to do is to say, shall we make a human community, a truly human one? Not human rights, but a human community in which we are concerned, that we actually do look and say that the death of that person will be the death of us. The disappearance of those peoples will not affect you. So that is more or less the argument in the book, that we come full circle into a time when we look to ourselves and not human rights. We look to ourselves in this world building that's going on. People going back to their communities, working with their people working in urban communities, people honoring each other, people learning their languages, all of these efforts, and there are so many today. That's our activism today. That's our activism today. And there's a couple things here. One more thing. Where are they? Well, that's to reflect on colonialism and capitalism as an effective economy rather than a rational one. We can look then for what Audra Simpson has called a refusal based on love. A refusal based on love. That we refuse to be victims, or we refuse this system, but it's based on love. Decolonization, which sets out to change the order of the world, is obviously a program of complete disorder, but it cannot come about as a result of magical practices, nor of a natural shock, nor of a friendly understanding. As Tuck and Yang from decolonization is not a metaphor. When I'm done soapboxing, I've been taught to say it Anabasi.
done. Kind of rough, but we got it.
Take some questions?
Sure. Hopefully, I didn't go on, I didn't have a clock infection.
I have a question.
Our videographer has a
Yes.
question.
Stop putting your hand in front of your mouth. No, I'm kidding.
Thank you very much. And I don't know what to say. I am Palestinian refugee. I cannot help it but to see here exactly the same story our people have been saying for 68 years. Even the picture for the woman with covered face, it's like you're having kofia on a Palestinian revolutionary woman.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned part of the healing is sometimes you bring the victims together to learn from the experience. Especially, we know that colonial subtler colonialism, it's eventually and always produce genocide. So the victim of this kind of style of colonialism, how can we bring them together? Because this is kind of part of the healing to talk with somebody else, have the same experience. The second thing, is there any grassroots? We're trying to bring these indigenous people to align with themselves, because part of the colonization is separating these issues away from each other, not just inside one community, also in general. So how is there any organization like that?
All I know is that I believe in creating these conversations. I like these rooms where there's a lot of us, you know what I'm saying, from different backgrounds in, to share our experiences. We might not have perfect understanding, okay? But if we don't take part and we continue to kind of isolate ourselves from each other, that's when, you know what I'm saying, we're much more vulnerable. And at this point in time, you know, all of us had, you know, we have, like I said, we have actually beautiful, you know what I'm saying, things that we can give each other. That's the real healing, you know. I didn't say as much, but that's what I mean by it. The real healing amongst us, okay, is this re-honoring of ourselves. I visited for an hour with an elder yesterday, and her name is Marie Cooper. She's from Sartlet, and she said to tell all of you to love each other. To love each other. And I know that, you know, we think that kind of is, you know, how can I say it? Are you talking about being a flower child or something? No, I'm not. It's just that more gets accomplished if we actually, we're going to need it, because if Trump gets in power, we need to actually embrace each other, okay, and know where to make these alliances. But I just think that it starts just by people being not afraid, okay, to put themselves on the line. You know, it's scary always. Our differences feel scary, because actually the powers that make us, you know what I'm saying, or the things that like make us feel like we're so different and the only one or whatever like that, that is the system. That's the system. The system, you know. So the words that get spoken in our, you know, communities a lot is, you know, at least one of the words that I've heard, not only in all the post-Salish communities, you know, that I have worked in, but, you know, across any country, was respect. You know, that respect has to come first. We have to respect your integrity, you know. We have to respect for your land and your teachings first, and not, you know what I'm saying? So I have to respect, give respect, and not just assume, okay, that I can either speak for you, or that I just really do know how you feel, or any of that. You have to have respect. And then that empowers the people's experience. But we need to get in these conversations more, because it's very complex, as we know. And it's also been, how can I say it? It's the things that separate us are real. They're real. I mean, they're real and they're dangerous. So we have to take them seriously, that there's a reason why we have no common language for what is happening to us. That's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate those words that you just spoke. And earlier you were saying that we have enormous amounts of energy in our people, in our places that store streams. Are you talking about ceremony there? Just wait.
All of it, everything,
Yeah,
all that's
like
there, all the knowledge that's there, and how people, can access it or use it. Some people, it's true, some people are ill. The thing of it is that illness in our, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody. All I'm saying is for myself, we didn't believe in illness that way. It meant there was some disorder, something was wrong, something bigger was off. It wasn't about an individual. Something bigger was off, and it was usually, it could be, a disorder. Like, there's a lot of stories around people having to get right, with each other in order for everything to begin to come back and land too. So those are just old stories. But we have those energies amongst us, and that is, to me, what a healing is. And I don't know, it's hard for me to use all those words because no one called it that, because they didn't think of us as being ill. Okay. Illness was a disorder of some other sort. See, in English, it's always deviant. And so I'm not able to totally, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I totally do. And
Yeah.
are you bringing, like, I hate to call it technology, but the language of the institution demands that we frame these mystical things with words like technology.
I do that for these audiences. I do that. It's a foreign language that I learned. It's called academic. Yeah, I learned academic in order to, you know what I'm saying, be able to frame things in languages that people might be able to take, you know what I'm saying, and get a little bit more understanding from their own. I tried to meet somebody somewhere, okay? But on the other hand, the kinds of languages that are restoration or restoring in the communities and stuff are always their own. We don't tell people what they do. They know and go there to the point that they can. But we cannot, you know what I'm saying, we cannot answer for each other. And I don't. Where I came from, we lost a lot of children in my generation. That's why I showed you a picture of my family. We grow back.
I've got,
Sorry, let's go right over there first and then we'll come over here.
I guess it's a question about frames and languages. So if the language of the institution sets up a particular frame and you speak academic there, I wanted to ask a question about poetry. I think to This Bridge Called My Back, I think to Audre Lorde,
Yes.
I think to Christos and
Yes.
the Americal, and we just
Yes.
put out another book of poetry talking to the diaspora, right?
Yes.
And so there was something you said about the intensity
Yes.
of what's trying to be communicated
Yes.
in all of the various ways that it might be communicated,
Yes.
what it would mean to restore a stream,
Yeah.
and all of whatever that's supposed to be,
Yeah.
ungraspable in a certain
Right. Yeah.
type of
And
language.
that's not for just one thing.
So I was going to ask you to speak about your relationship to poetry as at the same time
Yes.
as doing activism
Yes.
and your Sisters in Struggle, and why you think that there's a correlation between,
Yes.
why do people write poetry?
It was Gloria Bird and Joy Harjo, okay, because I was really close friends with, Joy Harjo and Gloria Bird had gone to school together, okay, at IAIA when it was a boarding school, high school. And so they were close friends from the time they were teenagers. And so I became friends with them in Portland in the 1980s. And we all had a poetry group, Anyway, so Joy Harjo was like, a person who believed that actually, of course, you know, this is built into some theory at this point in time, is that stories actually frame how people act. So if you change the story, you can change how folks act. And so the part of it about our writing at that point in time, we chose poetry because it was most accessible to us. We didn't have computers and stuff. We just had pencils. We had stuff we could stick in our back pocket, right? Okay. But that's the writing technology of it, okay? But the language part of it is something we understood really well because it's the way our elders spoke at home. They spoke orally and from the heart, and they'd have all these things about how they would speak, you know. But what they meant is that they didn't write it down, okay? It had to come from somewhere else, mostly from long experience about the protocol of their community, okay? But with us, what we borrowed was the intensity of it, because I believe in something called, you know, part of my work has been around something called felt theory. But felt theory is harder to convey to people other than the idea that always, when you want to change something, you have to be intense. And if you would recognize it, well, you can recognize it at a football game, right? And everyone gets intense. They want to like change that score, don't they? but what we meant is that if we wanted to get to people's hearts, poetry is an affective medium in the way that our elders' speeches were to us. You know what I'm saying? They're meant to bring the people into togetherness. And so oral mediums are like that. That's why I'm speaking to you. You're having a group experience. You're having a groupie experience here. At any rate, but we knew that and felt like it was the most effective medium to be activists in at that time. And so most of my poetry was written for movement work. Okay, my early poetry was always written for some gathering or something we had done, you know, in order to convey, you know, our feelings, our felt knowledge to everyone. So that's where it came from. And I used to say, well, I still say, it's not I used to say, I say, well, in the absence of me speaking my own language fluently, I spoke poetry as my first language because it was most like the language that I heard at home. And it's extremely powerful, and especially not just poetry, but any time that you gather people together, it's the intensity that will bind people, particularly if you want things to move. So that's what I think or experienced. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like your advice. And it involves a short story. In the early 90s, the Greater Victoria Water District was clear-cutting our drinking water sheets. People got together, many organizations and individuals, and took it to court and stopped the commercial logging operation. So some old growth is left in the water district. There's no more commercial logging. As a result of that campaign, some other surplus lands of the water district were not used for water supply. And a campaign started to get those areas as protected areas of the parks. And the area now is called CC Green New Belt.
Yeah.
That's a few years ago. And the motivation was, I mean, it's to stop the commercial logging operation in a drinking watershed. It's pretty, it's
Yeah.
a logical thing to do.
Yeah, it would seem.
And the same way with the protection of that forest, the area outside of water district, because biodiversity was really getting wiped out in the southern and beyond. So the motivations were that. Some years later, in a meeting with Chief Planis and Suk, we were discussing these issues. And he said, no matter what happened there, we were excluded from these lands. Because you can't hunt the park in the water district that we have, nobody's allowed in there. So what brought that to mind for me was every decision that we make
That's right.
in relation to land use
Yeah.
is an exclusion of the First
It
Nations
can be,
people that
you're
are
right,
here.
yes.
I mean, they have no influence on those decisions whatsoever. The governance of the Capital Regional District and the municipalities is completely separate from the governance of the reserves.
That's right.
So
And-
the question to you then is,
Yeah.
how, like, I can't even find the proper words, no matter what I say.
You're right, I can't half the time either. I hear you.
How would the First Nations be engaged again in this decision?
I can't speak for these First Nations, I can only say this, is that, this is the problem is because the system serves, the conservation movement, speaks a particular language because it serves a certain mindset, ideology, program, whatever you want to call it, you know what I'm saying? And so this has been the situation in that people don't they think that, like for instance, it's a whole worldview that you think that humans do not belong in a watershed, okay? It's a whole ideology, it's a whole mindset, okay? So what you're really looking at is that in the Western world, the idea of conservation has been to remove, if they think of it as a resource, is to remove anyone else from utilizing that resource. Where Native peoples, what they would thought is that somebody has to be responsible there, and so that something there is used in a good way, but not to be destroyed or used up. And they were extremely strict about it, okay? But if it's just a resource, you know what I'm saying, then it's dollars and cents, or even people's health as a secondary motivation or whatever. But whatever it is like the whales in the ocean, try to conserve the whales in the ocean, or conserve this or whatever. We did not have any kind of ideology of conservation. What we have is respect. We have respect for that life. And so you're not going to destroy something that if it's lost to you, if the salmon is actually lost to you, lost to all of us, it will mean the death of something here. And so we're really looking, it is, what you're talking about, it's not that you don't have the words, it's that when we talk about our differences, we might actually, that's why it wasn't that way. If you looked at the old territories and the boundaries between the people's territories, they were always about people's responsibility to that place. The chiefs took upon themselves, like, to say, all right, like, we're going to fish such and such a time. We're going to fish this much. But then we're not going to anymore because it's done now. It's done. We don't want to task it. A chief that could not answer to his people that the fish were, no longer available because he let somebody be crazy enough to go fish it out, or, and it didn't come back the next year or whatever like that. That was a person that was in trouble as a leader right away. That person had broken the law themselves by not, you know what I'm saying, being responsible, okay, for those territories. And so it's not that people didn't have it, they just didn't have that same kind of, it was a different way of thinking. It was a real different way of thinking. It still is, but we don't have the same kind of access, we don't have the same kind of power to put our way of life, or our thought, our way of thinking, into practice a lot, because it's a different way of thinking. That's what.
Question, okay, Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks for a really compelling and generous talk. I think my question's going to be considerably less generous than your talk was.
That's
Not because
okay.
it's critical, but just because it's an
Oh
academic
yeah,
question.
I'm
It's
using
going
it critical.
to demand that
Yeah.
you speak that language. And it's just about the relationship between human rights on the one hand and trauma on the other, because I can imagine a bunch of different possible ways of thinking about the relations and putting them together. But I just wanted to, and maybe you might just say the answers in your book, but
No, I don't
was
usually
gonna ask
say
you,
that.
Yeah, what is it about human rights as an idiom that tends to steer particular claims in the direction of trauma tales? And what is it about trauma discourse that lends itself to human rights claims? I mean, they definitely seem interimplicated.
You've got a Western legal system, okay, and so it's set up in kind of like a Western legal system, but without the actual adjudication. Okay, in other words, it's a legal forum or a kind of a pseudo legal forum, rights, legalities, etc., like that. But it has absolutely no other than it has policing powers. You know what I'm saying? People are invaded now at this point. Okay, right? Okay, so and that's where it's really interesting about that. For like say for instance, if there's you have a small indigenous nation in Africa or something, and they're not living up to, you know what I'm saying, or they have people that are impoverished by, multinational activity in that area or whatever, and then they go in, you know what I'm saying, and the people themselves are suffering, etc., and they invade the country on, on the basis of the human rights, activity in that area, it then becomes a policing, does it not? What's interesting to me was I've got all these little pieces and notes all over the place. Let's see if I can find this one. This is an interesting one. I thought that I never have enough time to share some of this stuff that I come across, but this is good for your thing. I listened to a woman who was really smart speaker about reconciliation in a really different venue, and it was the venue of how reconciliation is becoming a buzzword among police departments. Okay, and her name's Naomi Murakawa, and she says, reconciliation is reiterated in technologies of reform. Involving speculative psychology and procedural normative-based policing in communities, especially communities of color, where dignity and respect and the way they use their voices during their arrests, etc., neutral, transparent, like I'm going to arrest you now, etc. The cop is, being transparent, he has trustworthy motives or whatever, to create good feelings so that the person will have good behavior. And she says it's being more operationalized now in more and more community policing, where this affective language is inculcated, that designed to have good feelings about being policed. And she says it's an effort to give the subjects of state violence to consent to their policing, as it is. And so as I heard her say, what it meant is that they want the community, you know what I'm saying, to feel less threatened. So they use the words reconciliation with the community. So the community, even though it's still subject to violence like Flint, the everyday violences of being, a marginalized community, it's just had their, the water poisoned, etc. They want to calm you. They want to, reconcile and make sure effectively, you know what I'm saying, that you consent to your policing. So anyway, I'm always picking up little stuff like this around reconciliation, and as it's worked its way into our language and these different stuff. I don't know. That was probably off topic, but I thought it was interesting. Yeah.
call it an evening.
Oh, yeah, that'd be okay with me.
Thank you all very much. I just want to remind people that tomorrow,
So drag me out of bed?
she's being dragged out of bed again tomorrow. She'll be at the First People's House in the Ceremonial Hall from 10:30 to 1:30 for a session sponsored by the Academic Women's Caucus and the Office of Indigenous Affairs entitled Practicing Decolonial Love, Damages, Relations, Truth, and Telling, a TRC action event. And I think there's just a couple copies of her book left over there if you're interested. And just another thing that's happening on campus on Monday, March 21st at 7 p.m. There's a presentation by Elder Larry Grant in the HSD building A240. During this talk, Elder Larry Grant will reflect on his challenges growing up of Musqueam and Chinese ancestry. His lecture will discuss how self-respect, identity, and human rights have been denied to Indigenous children through government legislation and how social issues such as these continue to exist today. So again, a relevant topic. So thank you very much, Diane, and thank you all for coming.